In the spring of 1956, outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, an old handyman named Earl was asked a question every old house owner feared. How do you make an 83-year-old farmhouse last another 20 years without turning it into a money pit? Earl did not start with a remodel. He started with the habits old handymen trusted to keep houses alive. He looked at the bottom of the porch post. He touched the window sills. He checked where roof water landed. He opened the basement door and smelled the air before stepping down. Then he ran his thumb along a painted board to see whether the paint was still protecting the wood or only pretending to. Today, many people think old houses survived because they were built better. Sometimes they were, but that is only half the truth. Old houses lasted because someone kept noticing them. Number 18 on this list saved windowsills from slow rot. Number 9 was so plain that many grandfathers did it without calling it maintenance. And number 1 may be the real difference between a house that reaches 100 years and a house that feels tired at 30. These were not hacks. They were the old household system of attention, prevention, and respect for materials. This is history, memory, and practical home wisdom. Gas, wiring, roofs, structural damage, fire, serious plumbing, vehicles, mold, asbestos, or unsafe heights belong with qualified professionals today. So here are 25 forgotten ways old handymen made a house last 100 years. Number 25, they walked the house before the house yelled. An old handyman did not wait for a ceiling stain, a swollen door, or a soft porch board to announce trouble. He walked the house. Spring and fall were the natural seasons for it. He moved slowly around the outside, then through the basement, then through the rooms people used every day. He was not looking for perfection. He was looking for change. A board that had been flat last year was cupping. A window that used to close cleanly now needed pressure. A patch of paint near the sill had begun to bubble. The ground near the foundation stayed damp longer than it should. Those were not emergencies yet. That was the point. Old houses lasted because problems were caught while they were still small enough to be understood. A 5-minute look in April could save a $500 panic in November. But more than money, it saved the relationship between the person and the house. The house spoke softly first. The old handyman listened before it had to shout. Number 24. They kept water moving away from the house. Ask an old handyman what destroys a house, and he will not start with age. He will start with water. Water sitting where it should not sit. Water splashing where it should not splash. Water soaking wood, settling near the foundation, or dripping behind trim where no one bothers to look. Old handymen watched rain like accountants watched numbers. They looked at where the roof water landed. They looked at whether the downspout carried it away or dropped it right beside the wall. They noticed whether a splash block had shifted, whether soil had settled, whether a low corner stayed muddy after every storm. This was not glamorous work. Sometimes it meant moving a stone, clearing leaves from a safe, reachable spot, adding a simple extension, or calling someone when the problem was higher, bigger, or unsafe. The principle was simple. A house can forgive many things, but it cannot forgive constant, hidden water. That is why old houses with attentive owners survived. They were not dry by accident. Someone made them dry on purpose. Number 23, they painted before the wood was naked. Old exterior paint was not just decoration, it was armor. A father or handyman in the 1950s could look at a clapboard, porch rail, windowsill, or fascia board and know whether the paint still had life in it. He was not waiting for the wood to look abandoned. He was watching for the first chalky surface, the first little crack, the first place where paint stopped shedding water and started letting weather in. The mistake modern homeowners often make is waiting until the paint failure looks obvious from the street. Old handymen knew that by then the wood had already been exposed for a while. Touch-up painting did not feel exciting. Nobody gathered the family to admire one protected sill. But that quiet habit kept the sun and rain from eating boards one season at a time. There is a reason so many old houses look like they have been painted by generations of careful hands. Because they were. Paint was not vanity. Paint was preservation. Number 22. They treated the bottom of everything like the danger zone. Rot rarely begins in the proud, pretty middle of a board. It begins at the bottom of porch post, the bottom edge of a door, the lower corners of window trim, the place where siding sits too close to wet ground, the bottom rail of a screen door that catches every splash from a summer storm.
Old handymen watched those places because gravity sent trouble there. Water ran down. Dirt collected there. Snow rested there. Wet leaves piled there. A careless planter or stack of firewood held moisture there long after the rest of the wall looked dry. The old habit was inspection by vulnerability. Do not just admire the face of the house. Look at the feet. Sometimes the answer was a small cleaning. Sometimes it was fresh paint on an exposed edge. Sometimes it was moving soil, leaves, pots, or stored lumber away from the wood. Sometimes it was admitting the piece was too far gone and needed proper repair. The wisdom was knowing where age starts. In many houses, it starts at the bottom. Number 21. They never let soil become siding. Old houses were often built with more space between the ground and the wood than many later houses kept. Then time changed the grade. Flower beds rose. Mulch piled up. Soil washed against the foundation. A walkway was added. Leaves collected. Suddenly wood that was meant to breathe was living like it had been buried. Old handymen hated that. They knew wood touching damp soil was not a charming old house detail. It was an invitation. Moisture, insects, decay, and trouble all liked the same hidden, damp places. So they kept earth away from wood whenever they could. They pulled mulch back from siding. They made sure porch skirts could dry. They watched places where steps, planters, or flower beds trapped moisture against the house. This was not about making the yard look bare. It was about respecting what wood can and cannot survive. Wood can last a century in weather if it can dry. It cannot last long if the ground keeps holding it by the throat. Number 20. They kept air moving in the basement. An old basement had a smell. Some of it was harmless age, stone, old wood, cold dust, jars, earth, and time. But an old handyman could tell the difference between an old basement and a wet basement. He noticed air that felt dead. He noticed cardboard boxes pushed tight against damp walls. He noticed rust on tools that had not been wet directly. He noticed a musty smell that grew stronger after rain. To him, a basement was not just storage. It was the underside of the house. Old homes lasted when basements were allowed to breathe and dry. That could mean keeping stored things off the wall, using shelves instead of floor piles, opening safe vents when the season made sense, watching for leaks, and calling a professional when moisture, mold, drainage, or foundation trouble appeared. The principle was not complicated. A house needs dry bones. Ignore the basement long enough, and the whole house begins to carry that neglect upward. Number 19. They did not let little leaks become family legends. Every old house has a story about a leak someone meant to fix later. The stain by the chimney. The drip under the sink. The damp spot behind the washing area. The window that only leaks when rain comes from the east. Old handymen knew that only when it rains hard was not comfort. It was a warning with a schedule. They did not treat water as background noise. A drip got a pan, a pencil mark, a date, and attention. A stain was watched to see whether it grew. A mysterious wet place was not ignored because the room dried out later. Today, anything involving roofs, major plumbing, walls, ceilings, or hidden damage belongs with the right professional. But the old habit still matters. Do not normalize water. Water is patient. It will wait longer than you will. It will work at night, behind paint, under floors, inside wood, and above ceilings. Old houses lasted because someone refused to make peace with it. Number 18. They washed and cleared window sills. A window sill is a small shelf where a house quietly proves whether it is being cared for. Dust sits there. Rain hits there. Condensation gathers there. Dead insects collect in the corners. Paint cracks there. On old wood windows, a neglected sill can begin to soften long before anyone thinks of it as damage. Old handymen and careful homeowners did not treat window sills as decoration. They wiped them. They kept weep pads open where the window design had them. They touched paint before bare wood showed. They noticed whether water lingered in a corner after a storm. This was one of those little habits that saved wood without anyone praising it. A windowsill did not need a speech. It needed a rag, a look, and a little memory of what it looked like last season. This little habit matters because it shows the whole old house philosophy in miniature. The part that fails first is often the part everyone sees every day and stops seeing. Pause the count for a moment. Look at what these first 8 habits have in common. They are not dramatic. They are not the kind of repairs that make a man feel heroic. Water away from the wall. Paint before the wood is naked. Soil away from siding. Air in the basement. Sills kept clean. But that is exactly why they worked. Old handymen did not make houses last by waiting for one big rescue. They made houses last by preventing thousands of small betrayals. A drop of water. A patch of bare wood. A hidden damp corner. A pile of leaves against a post. A basement shelf pushed too close to stone. Modern culture notices failure because failure is loud. Old homecraft noticed conditions. That is the difference between repairing a house and stewarding one. Number 17. They protected thresholds like weak points. Door thresholds take abuse from both worlds. Outside brings rain, mud, snow, grit, leaves, and sunlight. Inside brings shoes, pets, grocery bags, children, and furniture legs dragged by people in a hurry. Old handymen watched thresholds because they knew the doorway was a battlefield. If the threshold cracked, loosened, rotted, or stopped shedding water, the trouble could move inward. Floors near doors began to darken. Drafts appeared. Bugs found gaps. The door stopped closing with that solid old sound. The old habit was simple: keep the threshold clean, visible, and protected. Do not let damp mats sit there for days. Do not let grit grind the finish away. Do not ignore a soft spot just because the door still locks. Sometimes a threshold only needed cleaning and finish. Sometimes it needed real repair. The important part was not pretending the entrance could take endless punishment. Every house has places where the outside tries to become the inside. Old handymen guarded them. Number 16. They used storm windows as seasonal armor. In many older homes, storm windows were not an optional extra. They were part of the house's winter clothing. Each fall, Someone carried them from the basement, garage, or shed. They were checked, cleaned, fitted, and put back before cold weather settled in. In spring, screens returned. This rhythm made windows last because the old sash was not asked to fight every season alone. Storm windows helped reduce drafts, protected old wood, slowed weathering, and made a room feel less exposed during hard months. But the important thing was the rhythm. Old homeowners planned for seasons instead of reacting to them. The house had a winter mode and a summer mode. There were things you did before flies arrived, before frost arrived, before storms arrived. Modern sealed windows made some of that ritual disappear. But the deeper lesson is still useful. A house lasts longer when someone asks, "What season is coming, and what does the house need before it gets here?" Number 15. They kept doors from becoming levers. A loose door is not just a loose door. It is a lever working against the frame every time it swings. Old handymen understood that weight, motion, and time can turn small looseness into bigger damage. An interior door with a loose hinge might begin to sag. A cabinet door with tired screws might pull the wood around them wider. A screen door that slammed all summer could punish the latch, the jamb, and the patience of everyone in the house. So they checked doors before they got dramatic. They listened for a scrape. They watched whether the gap looked even. They noticed whether a latch had to be lifted to catch. They tightened small hardware when it was safe and ordinary, and they knew damaged frames or exterior security doors were a different matter. The old lesson was mechanical, but also emotional. Do not let a small thing work against the house every day. Because every day is how damage becomes permanent. Number 14. They kept gutters from becoming planters. Old handymen had a particular dislike for seeing little trees growing where rainwater was supposed to move. A gutter full of leaves is not a gutter. It is a wet trough attached to the edge of the house. From the ground, they could often see the signs: water pouring over the side during a storm, staining on fascia boards, sagging sections, soil beaten flat below one spot, or icicles forming where they never used to form. Cleaning high gutters is not a casual job today. Heights, roofs, ladders, and electrical lines are real hazards, and many homes need a professional for that work. But the old principle remains: gutters are not trim. They are part of the water system. When that system fails, water goes looking for another path. It may choose the fascia. It may choose the wall. It may choose the basement. It may choose the porch post. Old houses lasted when water was not allowed to choose for itself. Number 13. They made small paint records. Some of the most useful things in an old house were written on scraps. Kitchen trim, 1954. South bedroom, pale blue. Porch rail, oil enamel. Hall touch-up mixed at Miller's Hardware. An old handyman knew that memory was not enough. Paint colors changed. Brands disappeared. Cans rusted. Labels peeled. Rooms got touched up by 3 different people over 20 years, and suddenly no one knew what was on the wall. A small record kept a small repair small. If a windowsill needed touching up, the right paint was not a mystery. If a porch rail needed one board protected, the whole porch did not become a guessing game. If a future owner found the note, the house had handed them a little piece of its own manual. That is what old home care often was, leaving clues for the next person. A 100-year house is usually a house that has been understood by more than one generation. Number 12. They saved matching scraps. Old handymen saved pieces that looked useless until the day they were priceless. A strip of trim from the back bedroom. A short floorboard from the pantry. A few old bricks behind the shed. A hinge from a cabinet that had been removed. A piece of old screen, a sash weight, a drawer pull, a bit of molding with the right profile. To a neat modern eye, this looked like clutter. To the house, it was a vocabulary. Older homes often used materials and shapes that were not sitting on a big box shelf. The exact trim profile, the old growth board width, The odd hinge size, the handmade bracket, the discontinued knob, all of it mattered when the goal was to repair without making the house look patched by strangers. The old handyman did not save everything. That would be hoarding. He saved what belonged to the house. There is a difference. One is clutter. The other is memory with a purpose. Number 11. They respected old plaster. Old plaster walls were not drywall with a different name. They behaved differently. They cracked differently. They breathed differently. They carried age in a way that could look imperfect but still be sound. An old handyman did not panic at every hairline crack. He looked at it. Was it new? Was it widening? Did it return after patching? Was the wall loose, hollow, bulging, or damp? Those were different questions, and they had different answers. The habit was not to smear over everything and call the wall fixed. The habit was to read the wall. A stable old crack might be a cosmetic repair. A moving crack, damp plaster, loose sections, or anything that suggests structural movement deserves professional attention. The difference matters because old houses can be both strong and honest about their age. Many modern renovations erase old plaster because it looks imperfect. Old handymen often tried to understand it first. That is why so many 100-year houses still feel solid. Their walls were not treated like disposable surfaces. Stop again and look at the pattern. The middle of this list is about memory. A house lasts longer when someone remembers its paint, its trim, its seasonal windows, its thresholds, its plaster, and the little pieces that belong to it. That memory does not have to be romantic. It can be a jar label, a shelf of saved scraps, a note in a drawer, or a father saying, "Don't throw that hinge away. That one fits the pantry door." Modern replacement culture is forgetful by design. It wants every problem to become a product. Old homecraft was different. It wanted every repair to belong to the house. The right scrap, the right paint, the right season, the right amount of attention before the damage spread. The next habits go even deeper, into floors, porches, tools, pests, and the old discipline of knowing when a repair was not yours to do. Number 10. They protected floors from grit. Hardwood floors do not usually die from one dramatic injury. They die from grit. Tiny stones, sand, road dust, winter salt, mud dried into sharp grains. All of it comes in on shoes, works under chair legs, and acts like sandpaper with every step. Old homeowners understood the power of a good mat, a boot scraper, a broom near the door, and the old rule that outside shoes did not always belong deep inside the house. This was not fussiness. It was floor preservation. A floor that gets swept often, protected at entry points, and spared constant grit can survive generations of feet. A floor that is treated like pavement begins to look tired long before its time. Old houses lasted because families protected surfaces before they looked damaged. They did not wait until the finish was gone. They kept the enemy from being ground into it every day. Number 9. They kept a house log without calling it one. Many old fathers had a memory system that lived in pencil marks, jar labels, calendar notes, and the backs of envelopes. Furnace serviced October. North window painted May. Basement wet after hard rain from east. Back door hinge tightened twice. They may not have called it a house log, but that is what it was. A house that lasts 100 years is too complicated to trust entirely to memory. Dates matter. Patterns matter. Repeating problems matter. If the same door sticks every August, that tells a story. If the same corner gets damp after every storm, that tells a story too. Old handymen watched patterns across years. A modern homeowner often sees one problem. An old homeowner saw the third time it happened. That is a different kind of intelligence. Number 8. They treated porches as weather machines. A porch is not just a place to sit. It is a machine for managing sun, rain, mud, shade, entry, and the first few feet of the home. Old handymen knew porches took punishment. Posts wicked moisture. Steps loosened. Paint wore at the front edge. Railings moved. Leaves trapped dampness in corners. The floorboards told stories about where rain blew in and where people stepped most often. So porch care had a rhythm. Sweep the corners. Watch the post bases. Keep the paint alive. Do not let wet leaves sit against wood. Notice a step that feels different. Respect railings, stairs, and anything people rely on for safety. Those are not casual repairs when they are loose or damaged. The porch mattered because it protected the house and welcomed the family at the same time. When old houses have good porches after a century, it is usually because someone understood that the porch was always working, even when no one was sitting there. Number 7. They used the right nail, screw, or fastener for the old material. A careless fastener can damage a good old board. Old handymen knew this by feel. They knew when a screw was too long, when a nail was too thick, when a piece of trim needed a smaller touch, when hard old wood needed patience, and when forcing a fastener would split what they were trying to save. This is one reason old repairs sometimes look graceful. The repair did not overpower the material. Modern hardware aisles are full of excellent choices, but choice without judgment can be dangerous to an old house. A fastener meant for one job can ruin another. A heavy screw can split delicate trim. The wrong metal can stain or react. The wrong length can come through the other side like an accusation. The old rule was quiet: match the fastener to the work. Not the biggest. Not the newest. The right one. Number 6. They sharpened before they forced. Old handymen understood that dull tools damage houses. A dull chisel tears instead of cutting. A dull scraper digs instead of lifting. A dull plane skips and chatters. A dull saw makes a man push harder than he should. And when a man pushes harder than he should, the house pays for it. So sharpening was not a hobby. It was part of repair. A small stone on the bench, a file by the vise, a rag for wiping metal, a habit of checking the edge before blaming the wood. This mattered in old houses because old materials were often worth saving. Trim, doors, floors, built-ins, and porch details could carry the marks of careless work forever. The old handyman made the tool ready so the house did not have to absorb his impatience. That is a lesson bigger than sharpening. Before applying force, improve the condition of the thing applying it. Number 5. They watched for insects by looking for evidence, not panic. Old houses and insects have known each other for a long time. That does not mean every mark is a crisis. An old handyman watched for evidence: fine sawdust where it should not be, soft wood near damp areas, tiny wings, new holes, mud tubes, or a window sill that changed texture from one season to the next. He did not ignore it, but he did not guess wildly either. Moisture, wood contact, and hidden access often tell the bigger story. Many serious pest problems are really moisture problems with legs. Today, pest identification and treatment belong with professionals when there is uncertainty, active infestation, structural wood, or health risk. But the old habit remains useful: look early, look calmly, and look for the reason the house became inviting. Old houses lasted when insects were not allowed to turn hidden damage into a family surprise. The sooner someone noticed, the less the house had to surrender. Number 4. They did not modernize away the house's ability to dry. This is one of the most forgotten old house lessons. Many older homes were built to get wet sometimes and dry afterward. They had materials that breathed, gaps that moved air, porches that shaded walls, storms and screens that changed with the season, basements that needed ventilation, and walls that depended on drying more than sealing. Old handymen were careful about trapping moisture. They did not cover every old surface with the wrong modern layer just because it looked clean for a month. They were suspicious of anything that made wood, plaster, or masonry stay wet longer than before. This does not mean old methods were always better or that modern materials are bad. Many modern products are excellent when used correctly. But the old principle is gold: never stop a house from drying unless you truly understand where the moisture will go. That is not a small lesson. That is how old homes survive. Before the top three, step back from the list. The first habits kept water away. The middle habits kept memory alive. The last habits protected the materials themselves. Together, they show why the best old handymen were not just fixers. They were interpreters. They could read weather on a sill, neglect in a hinge, moisture in a basement smell, bad judgment in the wrong screw, and future trouble in a porch post that stayed wet too long. The house was not an object to them. It was a system. And a system does not last because one part is strong. It lasts because every part is watched in relation to the others. That is what made the old work feel almost invisible. When it was done right, nothing happened. No ceiling collapsed. No sill rotted. No floor wore out early. No porch step surprised anyone. The reward for good homecraft was a quiet house. Number 3. They knew when a patch was lying. A bad patch can hide a problem long enough for it to become expensive. Old handymen knew this. They had seen paint cover rot, caulk cover movement, paneling cover damp plaster, rugs cover soft floors, and trim cover gaps that kept growing behind it. They were not against patches. They were against dishonest patches. A good patch protects, stabilizes, and buys time honestly. A bad patch hides the truth from the next person who needs to understand the house. This is one reason old handymen looked under, behind, and around things. They wanted to know whether the repair matched the problem. A stain painted over 3 times was still a stain. A soft board under fresh paint was still soft. A door shaved every year was not just a door problem. The old wisdom was blunt: do not decorate over a question. Answer it first. Number 2. They respected professional lines. The old handyman knew a lot, but the good ones knew where their knowledge ended. That may be the part people forget when they romanticize the past. A careful old-timer might fix a drawer, protect a sill, sharpen a plane, patch a screen, touch up paint, or keep water moving away from the wall. But gas, serious electrical work, major plumbing, roofs, structural movement, chimneys, rot in load-bearing areas, unsafe stairs, mold, asbestos, and foundation issues were never things to treat casually. The best old handymen were not reckless. They were observant. They could often spot trouble early enough to call the right person before the repair became desperate. That is still home competence. Maybe it is one of the highest forms of it. Knowing what you should not touch is part of knowing a house. Old houses lasted because pride did not always get the final vote. Sometimes responsibility meant putting the tool down. Number 1. They treated maintenance as belonging, not chores. The most forgotten way old handymen made a house last 100 years was not paint, gutters, storms, saved scraps, sharp tools, or a basement shelf. It was the belief that maintenance belonged to the people living there. Not because every owner could do every repair. Not because calling a professional was shameful. But because the house was not someone else's mystery. It was the place where the family slept, ate, argued, recovered, celebrated, aged, and returned at the end of hard days. So the house deserved attention. A loose hinge was not just hardware. It was the pantry door your wife opened every morning. A draft was not just air. It was the corner where your child did homework. A porch step was not just wood. It was where your mother paused before coming inside. A windowsill was not just trim. It was where the winter light landed at 4 in the afternoon. That is why old handymen cared. They were not maintaining objects. They were maintaining the conditions of family life. Think back to Earl in 1956, walking around that old Pennsylvania farmhouse with a pencil behind his ear and a coffee can in his hand. He was not asking whether the house was perfect. He was asking whether the house was being heard. The porch posts, the sills, the paint, the basement air, the soil line, the thresholds, the old plaster, the saved scraps, the notes on jars, the little pieces of seasonal memory, all of them told him whether the house had been treated as disposable or as something entrusted to human care. That is what a 100-year house really is. It is not just better lumber. It is not just old craftsmanship. It is a long chain of people who noticed one small thing before it became one large thing. Some were fathers. Some were mothers. Some were grandfathers, neighbors, widows, farmers, carpenters, janitors, painters, and children asked to hold the flashlight. They all left something behind. Not always a signature. Sometimes just a dry basement, a painted sill, a porch that still held, a floor that still shone, a coffee can of saved screws, or a handwritten note that told the next person what color the kitchen trim used to be. The old value was not perfection. It was stewardship. The belief that a home lasts longer when the people inside it pay attention before the world teaches them to replace. If this reminded you of a father, grandfather, neighbor, old house, basement shelf, or family repair habit, tell us what he checked, what he saved, or what part of the house he never ignored. Because sometimes a house lasts 100 years not because nothing ever went wrong, but because someone cared early enough to make it right.